Yes, this title is true. I'll explain everything. So, most people know Canada as being a bit big on maple syrup. I mean, it's on Canada's very own flag. Canada produces 85% of the world's maple syrup, so you know they're going to get up to some sorts of maple syrup craziness. Now, the province that makes by far the most maple syrup in Canada is Quebec, which creates over 90% of the country's maple syrup production. So in the year 1958, maple syrup producers in the Quebec region of Beauce made a joint plan to protect their rights as maple syrup producers and to market their syrup collectively. This effort would inspire a larger agreement all across the province of Quebec in the year 1966. This would result in the Federation of Quebec Maple Syrup Producers, or the Fédération des Producteurs Agricoles du Québec, as the locals would call it. Quebec is predominantly French-speaking, in case you didn't know. Anyways, I'm just going to call them the FPAQ for this video, because I don't feel like saying that whole thing again. There's also the Ontario Maple Syrup Producers Association, which operates in Ontario as opposed to Quebec, and is similar to the FPAQ, but they don't take maple syrup as seriously, so I'm not going to talk about them. Ever since 1989, all FPAQ producers would abide by a collective agreement to market their product, aka their maple syrup. The producers would create policies together, negotiate selling strategies, create quality criteria, and sponsor promotional activities. The maple syrup producers would even enforce production quotas. The FPAQ also cooperates with the Acer Center to conduct experiments and research on maple syrup and related maple syrup products, which has got to be one of the funniest maple syrup related sentences you could say. Also, why hasn't anyone made a superhero named Super Syrup whose DNA gets infused with radioactive maple syrup? So anyway, here's when we get to the title. The FPAQ maintains a strategic reserve of maple syrup known as the International Strategic Reserve, but is often referred to as the Global Strategic Maple Syrup Reserve. The reserve is spread across 3 locations and holds a total of 12,200 tons of maple syrup. The ISR is operated as a government-sanctioned cartel, meaning it's a cartel that's authorized by the Quebec government. Yeah, a cartel of maple syrup. It's used to regulate global prices and supply of maple syrup. Let that sink in. Quebec really cares about maple syrup, and once you learn how valuable it can be, you'll understand. One barrel is worth $1,200 Canadian, which is 10 times more than the value for an equivalent amount of American crude oil. So, this is when our story is going to change a bit, and by a bit, I mean it'll turn into a heist storyline. So, this is the story of the Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist. In what was most likely an insider job, throughout several months between 2011 and 2012, 9,571 barrels of maple syrup was stolen from an FPAQ facility, which is nearly 3,000 tons of maple syrup. This has a value of $18,700,000 Canadian. The heist was carried out by taking the white, unmarked metal barrels which were stored within the FPAQ facility. Note, these barrels were inspected just every once a year, so it wasn't hard to do what the heisters were about to do. The barrels were transported with trucks and were siphoned out into other barrels, and the original barrels were filled with water and then returned to the FPAQ facility. The thieves would later start to siphon out the syrup directly within the facility without refilling the barrels with water. The stolen syrup, which is a phrase I never thought I would say, was transported south and east to Vermont and New Brunswick, respectively, where it was trafficked away in numerous small batches to not raise suspicion. It would reach the market and be sold to syrup distributors who genuinely believed the syrup had been acquired legally and thought it had been created in New Brunswick. Once the FPAQ discovered the theft, a police investigation began to track down the stolen maple syrup. Also, could you imagine being a police officer, thinking that your job would be to investigate crimes like burglaries and murders, then being told that your assignment would be to track down millions of dollars worth of maple syrup? In the end, hundreds of the stolen syrup barrels were found in New Brunswick, yet there are still hundreds of more barrels that are as of yet unfound. 17 men were arrested for being connected to the heist, with the accused ringleader, Richard Valliere, being sentenced to 8 years in prison along with a $9.4 million fine Canadian for stealing some maple syrup. The Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist was the most valuable heist in Canadian history, along with that sentence being one of the most stereotypical sentences in Canadian history. The heist would gain renown among pop culture, with it being the focus for an episode of the Netflix show Dirty Money, along with the heist featuring in several songs and other such things. So that is the story of Canada's maple syrup cartel and the Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist. What's the lesson? Well, Quebec, they take their maple syrup seriously. Thank you for watching this short video. I had fun writing it. So goodbye and have a good day.